Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. We have a number of participants who've joined us. Thank you to those actually who joined a little bit early and shared where they're coming from. We're happy to have all of you now with us on the line. I guess I should say my name is Lee Tompert, and I'm joining you from New York. So for me, it's good evening, but I know for some of you it's good morning and others it's good afternoon. So I just want to thank everybody so much for joining us today. This is the webinar on implementing women's empowerment principles, the WEPs, in fragile and conflict affected states. This is me, as you can also see on the video. As I said, my name is Lee Tompert, and I'm the UN Women Coordinator of the Promoting Women's Economic Empowerment in the Indian Ocean Rim Project. This is a 3-year project supported by the Australian Government Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, or DFAT. And this project is being implemented in collaboration with the Indian Ocean Rim Association, which is the acronym we call IORA. And this webinar is actually part of the project series on the UN Women, UN Global Compact's Women's Empowerment Principles. So for those of you who are actually not familiar with IORA, it's an intergovernmental organization that's aimed at strengthening regional cooperation and sustainable development within the Indian Ocean region. So that includes actually 22 member states and 10 different dialogue partners. Before we get started, I just wanted to briefly share our agenda for today's webinar. We're happy to have 2 guest speakers with us today. Dr. Sadia is an entrepreneur and the founder and chancellor of Hanoi Academy. This is an academic progression and polytechnic academy in Mogadishu, Somalia. Hanoi Academy is also a new WEPs signatory, so congratulations to Hanoi Academy, and we're really happy to have you here with us, Dr. Siad. And then Alice Loff, CEO of Committed to Good, or CTG as it's more commonly known, is a private sector company that enables humanitarian and development projects in conflict zones. So thanks to you, Alice, for joining us as well. I'll be asking our speakers a series of questions for a discussion. It'll be kind of more of a informal chat rather than formal PowerPoint presentations. And then we're going to open up the webinar for questions from you, the audience. But you're also welcome to send in any questions for the speakers during the webinar by using the Q&A tab that you'll find in the bottom of your controls, or you can raise your hand during the Q&A session, and I can help unmute your microphone. So today's webinar is expected to last for 1 hour, and just to let you all know that it is being recorded, so we can share the recording with you in the next few days. So just in case you have any kind of technical difficulties, don't worry, you won't miss anything. So I just wanted to provide some of you with, I know that many of you are already familiar with the WEPs, but I just wanted to provide a quick overview for those of you who are not familiar with the Women's Empowerment Principles. So this is, as you can see on the screen, it's a set of 7 principles that offers guidance to businesses on how to promote gender equality and women's empowerment in the workplace, marketplace, and community. So these WEPs were established by the UN Global Compact and UN Women, and they're informed by international labor and human rights standards and grounded in the recognition that businesses have a stake in and a responsibility for gender equality and women's empowerment. This is a shared responsibility. It's not just up to governments, but also to the private sector as well. The WEPs are a primary vehicle for corporate delivery on gender equality dimensions of the Sustainable Development Goals. So there's more and more recognition of the role that the private sector can play today in achieving these international goals that have been set, also international human rights conventions, such as the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, numerous human rights, ILO standards. The private sector has a huge role to play. So by joining the WEPs community, the CEO basically signals their commitment of the company to this WEPs agenda at the highest level of the company, and commits to work collaboratively in multi-stakeholder networks to foster business practices that empower women. That's at the heart of the WEPs. So please note that the WEPs were designed for the private sector, but other actors such as governments, NGOs, unions, academia, all these actors can also serve as allies and adopt the framework for their own actions to advance gender equality and women's empowerment. But of course, without the enabling environment, it will not be possible for the private sector to actually implement the WEPs. So it's key that governments, including local governments and regional and international bodies, actually create this enabling environment to support the implementation of the WEPs through adopting gender responsive policies, laws, and regulations, and particularly in today's realities with the impacts of COVID-19, this is more important than ever. In terms of the WEPs, we have over 4,000 companies around the world have committed to actually implementing the WEPs, including 456 companies that are based in IORA countries. The highest number of WEPs signatories within the Indian Ocean Rim region are actually in India and United Arab Emirates, Australia, and South Africa. However, WEPs signatories can also be found in both Somalia and Yemen, which are two of the IORA countries that are currently affected by conflict. So just to kind of go over some of the challenges and opportunities for women's economic empowerment in fragile and conflict-affected states. Basically, we know it's well documented that conflicts and situations of instability can greatly exacerbate existing inequalities in society and pre-existing patterns of discrimination against women and girls. The Georgetown Institute's Women, Peace, and Security Index provides a measure of women's well-being and their empowerment in homes, communities, and societies. They rank 167 countries on trends based on 11 indicators, and these indicators are based on issues of inclusion, justice, and security. So in the 2019-2020 data of the two IORA countries affected by conflict, Somalia actually ranked 154 out of 167 countries, and Yemen sadly ranked last at 167 on the index. So these are very alarming and concerning trends. As detailed in the soon-to-be launched UN Women Report on Women's Economic Empowerment in the Indian Ocean Rim, this is the report that's supported by the government of Australia and our project, gender gaps in financial inclusion, employment rates, informal employment, and access to land and credit are greater in conflict-affected countries than in other developing countries. Instability and insecurity in governments and public and private sector institutions weaken the enabling environment for women's economic empowerment. However, at the same time, the instability that comes with conflict can also shift gender norms and practices to allow women to take on new roles. Women's participation in income-generating activities can actually increase in conflict-affected countries, and they may even become the primary breadwinners of their households. Women refugees and internally displaced persons may actually be able to find work more easily than their husbands or other male family members, but unfortunately this work does tend to be informal and insecure, and therefore does not lead to decent work or any kind of security. There's also a risk that the change in gender roles in the household in which the woman becomes the breadwinner can lead to a violent backlash and domestic violence against the women, working women from their male partners. And briefly, just to go over some of the challenges and also opportunities for implementing the WEPs. As I mentioned before, the WEPs provides a framework to support the adoption of business practices that empower women. These can include, for example, adopting policies for equal pay for work of equal value, gender responsive supply chain practices, and zero tolerance against sexual harassment in the workplace. Also increasing women's presence on boards, adopting flexible work options, paid parental leave, gender sensitive recruitment and retention practices, and equal access to all company supported education and training programs are just some gender sensitive actions that can contribute to WEPs implementation. However, the UN Global Compact, actually the UK network, recently has been holding a webinar series, Business Action for Women, Peace and Security. And one of their most recent webinars, Michelle Breslauer from the UN Global Compact basically kind of did a provided a really good kind of conceptual framework of understanding the links and relationships between business action and women, peace, and security, basically kind of explaining that businesses operating in fragile and conflict environments must adopt practices that are both gender sensitive and conflict sensitive. So you need both a gender lens and a conflict lens if you're a business operating in these kind of high-risk environments. So you basically, as a company, need to not only create an internal environment that promotes gender equality and ensures the safety of your employees, but also external practices that support strong and accountable governance structures and institutions, as well as peaceful societies. So it's kind of a double objective and responsibility. So the UN Global Compact's guidance on responsible business in conflict-affected and high-risk areas details some of the conditions that may be present and pose specific challenges for businesses operating in these environments. Some of these include human rights violations, the presence of an illegitimate or unrepresentative government, lack of equal economic and social opportunity, systematic discrimination against certain populations, endemic corruption, chronic poverty, and other factors. And I would also add gender inequality as one of these conditions that could be added to the list. But at the same time, we also have opportunities. So businesses are creating jobs, they're generating revenue that advances economic development and recovery from conflict. They're making sustainable investments in cities and communities, and also have the opportunity to set standards of transparency, accountability, non-discrimination, human rights, and decent work. So considering these challenges and opportunities, how can the private sector contribute to both women's economic empowerment and also promote peace and stabilization at the same time? And furthermore, important for our webinar, how can the WEPs actually be used as an effective framework to achieve these goals? So we are very lucky to have our two speakers with us today that I'm hoping and know actually will be able to share their experiences and recommendations and expertise on these issues. So without further ado, I would like to move on to our first speaker. We have the pleasure of having Dr. Sadia join us today. She's a serial entrepreneur and the founder and chancellor, as I mentioned earlier, of Hanoi Academy. This is an academic progression and polytechnic academy in Mogadishu, Somalia. And the academy provides languages and personal and professional development courses and training to civil servants, professionals, and university graduates. They also provide technical and vocational education training and job creation, entrepreneurship, and employment opportunities. So Dr. Sadia is also the chair of the managing committee of Somali STEM Society, and she's a pioneer in STEM education, as well as human capital development mechanisms, which use the 3 E's: empowerment, education, and employment. So she's helping to model these approaches in Somalia. Dr. Sadia, let's see if I can ask you to unmute your microphone.
Yes.
Okay. If you could actually briefly just, for those of us who are not really very familiar with the status of the conflict in Somalia, if you could maybe just share with us very briefly a little bit about the current status of this conflict, how maybe it's affected the private sector or investment, economic development in the country, and also specifically how has it affected the opportunities for women's economic advancement?
Thank you very much for having me, first and foremost. And Somalia is overcoming over 2 decades of civil war. The country is getting actually the right path, although the election is actually coming and a lot of people is actually busy with the election, then security and economical development. At the moment, with the US embassy, with the EU and other international communities are actually focusing about employment and job creation, and the talk is actually there, and there have been a lot of how can I say, focus on that area. Sadly, the private sector is the one that actually faced a lot of challenges when the civil war happened back in 1990s. In 2015, I believe there was an investment law was passed in 2015 to promote and protect foreign investment. And according to the Somali Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the law aims to offer favorable, protection and tax advantages for the foreign investment. That was aiming to support the Somali economics in the private sectors. At the moment, there is not a lot of foreign investment that will help the private sectors. And with the COVID-19, a lot of businesses was actually shut down. And that was mainly small businesses led by females. But overall, the country is overcoming this prolonged civil war, and it's getting the right path.
So actually in this context, can you tell us what does the Hanoi Academy do, and how does it actually support women's economic empowerment?
Hanoi Academy, as you mentioned, is academic progression and political academy. When I came back in first time actually in 2011, I saw the gap in capacity, like skills. A lot of people were going to university, and universities were getting opened. And I believe Somalia is one of the biggest actually when on record who have a lot of universities, but there were no academic progression and polytechnic academy that will build the capacity of civil servant academics, and also help develop technical and vocational education training. So we focused on that area, and not only that, but also like give options to our students, like, they either need further education, so we help them to learn English language so that they can actually go abroad and take further education, either masters or PhDs. So instead of going to the West as a refugee, they can go there, gain an education and come back to rebuild the country. Or they have the option that we help them to build their capacity and help them to find a job. So we set it up two platforms. One is Khibrat Recruitment Agency. It works like headhunting way, because Somalia is not ready, the traditional recruitment agencies that we know in the West. And then Babigob, which is a freelancing website. We also give options and created the first social innovation hub, where we have the 17 sustainable development goals, where we allow them to sit a nice, comfortable space where they can actually think and be creative, and any solution that they think that they can contribute, they can convert into profitable businesses. So that's what we more likely do, although we have small other projects along the way, but we actually focus women to have a seat on the table and get the opportunities that they deserve. Because when you look Somali economics, sadly, in Somalia, you won't see big companies owned by women. Somali men are the business owners, and they don't like to employ females. One great example is that the biggest employment company and the richest company do not hire women. And I was very shocked when I came back to Somalia, and when I argued, they said, they took me to the Islamic or religious point of view saying, oh, we, like women and men who are not married should not be in the same small room. In my point of view, that is not correct. Although they will argue like, yes, we hired few women, but those ladies are actually cleaners. They are not decision makers, you know. And not long ago, I was talking to one of their board member, and he said, no, this time we actually have a female who is a shareholder, and she's on the board. And I said, okay, that is actually good progress, but we need to see more women in leadership positions. It is not changed as much as we wish to see. You know, luckily, when you look in the political aspect in Somalia, females have 30% quota to sit in the parliament, but we don't see that in businesses. We don't see that in employment, in private sectors. And one of the, you know, things that the government can argue, the other day I was having a conversation with the Minister of Planning and Investment, is that, like, you know, we cannot force the private sectors to hire more females. We cannot force them to appoint women in higher positions. And one of the conversations that was keep coming up again and again, and some things that Hanoi Academy tried to do so much was like, if we hire females in higher positions, we are like, we saw so many times they get married as soon as they get sustainable income, and they get pregnant, and they will be away, and you cannot fire them because, like, their tribe or their relative or her husband, you know, people will come to your office and they will complain. So then I said, okay, that is, you know, a gap that Hanoi Academy must fill and bridge that gap. So what we have done is that we trained, you know, nursery nurses, like, you know, childcare, and then bought, you know, equipment all the way from Leicester in UK, and then actually brought last year, not the beginning of this year, we bought it actually last year, and then arrived in January 2020. Sadly, I applied loan to open the nursery school, and the bank still has the deed. When the COVID came, because it took a while to process the loan, they actually refused to give the loan out to me. You know, I understand the challenges. So if I am a female, you know, working in Somalia is facing this kind of challenges, what about those who don't have the opportunities that I have, and the network and the friends that I have in Somalia and elsewhere? So those are the bridges that we are trying, you know, I mean, you know, to building the bridges between, you know, filling the gaps. So, you know, at Hanoi Academy, we try to encourage women, you know, to apply higher positions, although they know that they are not going to get it. And one of the opportunities that came up was this big investment, like and construction company that is aiming to build more than 3,000 houses. They came to us looking for a project manager, and we found two very talented young girls, educated in the West, but wanting to work in Somalia. And they said, oh, yes, but soon they're gonna get married. And, you know, they would not actually take this position very seriously. And then another guy said, you know what, if they see these beautiful women, all these like MPs and they actually found all the excuses in their book not to give the job to the girls that we found, but instead another guy. So the issue is still there. and I don't think it's going away soon. But we are starting to have the right conversation.
Wow. In terms of Hanoi Academy, is there a kind of an equal ratio of male students and female students, or are there more males, or?
There have been more males because of TVET, technical vocational education training. There is less females who's going to apply. Construction and solar energy and electrician and all of that. But we try, when we see this kind of unbalanced enrollment, we try to come up another course which will be more how can I say good for women. So during COVID, everywhere else actually closed because we were in institutions, so we had to close down. And then what happened was, like, I have over 33 people, both full-time and part-time, working with us. And I don't have money to cover, their salaries, and it would be heartbreaking to let them go. So I had to be very innovative, and then we start actually producing we were the first to produce face masks. And then what I saw was, like, we had to call all of our former students. Some of them sold their tailoring machines, so we had to buy new ones for them. And majority of them were males. And then we had to hire few females, to iron it, packaging, all of that, to do to sanitize, so then it wasn't still enough. So what I had to do was, I had to roll out and say, okay, we have to train only females how to make soaps. And shampoo, like hand sanitizer. So for that, for me, it was like to balance, the gender and give women opportunities. And luckily, all students that we were enrolling in that training was all females, and they also make after the training, they make profitable income. Where they were supporting their families. So for us, although the ratio is higher, like more men, yet again, we always try, to balance.
And with your work in the field of STEM, with the STEM Society, do you have any ways of trying to recruit women or girls to be engaged in that field, or to pursue it as a career?
Yes, well, my background is STEM, and I love STEM subjects, and I believe STEM is the future. And without STEM, I don't think, like, not only Somalia, but Africa as a whole will not actually be the right, position in the world. So what we saw, sadly, there are more men teachers than females. And there are less girls in STEM education. In health sector, midwifery, nurses, you will see more females. But combined with the 4 subjects of STEM subjects, there are more male dominated. And a lot of girls are not comfortable, to position themselves in a STEM subject, unless it is a health sector. So we try our best, to talk about, like, Nobel Prize winners, like, like they don't understand what all of this is. But if you don't actually talk about earlier on in life and say, yes, it is doable, you can be a scientist, technology is everywhere nowadays, you can become a great mathematician. And then the first question that the girls ask you is that, is there a real job for a mathematician?
Mm.
And then you have to answer it, and you have to try to make as interesting and as possible, and show small stuff like, Lego equipment, like, and show how interesting, science and STEM subject it can be. And there is a gap, for females, and they should actually apply themselves to those subjects. Sadly, there is no a lot of labs in Somalia, even university level. So what we have done is that we came up this idea of mobile STEM lab. So we have this van, and then converted into a lab, got a tent, and then we are going schools to schools.
Wow.
With the STEM equipment, and show so that their hands can get dirty, and
Yeah.
they can do things, because in a STEM subject, without doing it, like it will be difficult to
Right.
understand it.
Right.
So, and our target is actually to involve as many young girls as possible, and allow them, like, to aim higher positions, not less.
Mm. Excellent. I just one last quick question. It seems like you already are implementing a lot of the WEPs principles in your work, both at Hanoi Academy and with the STEM Society. But just out of curiosity, what led you to apply to be a WEPs signatory, and what are some of the goals that you hope to achieve as a signatory?
We are aiming to create a safe and secure working space for women in private sectors. We have a good working relationship with major Somali private sectors, businesses. We are also part of the Somali Chamber of Commerce. And we are not only training females for new jobs, but also creating female-led cooperatives in farming, agriculture, livelihood, fishery, renewable energy, and also allowing women not only like to have small businesses in the market, but also to be a decision maker in the boardrooms. Yes, there is a long way to go, but our role and the reason that we applied is to be the forefront for Somalia, and support the private sectors and allow them to understand, because if they see us as an institution trying to explain, and all of those worries that companies have to employ women, if we say, okay, what's your worry? Is it childcare? Yes, okay, we have the solution. We will help in that aspect. If it is training and capacity building, we will support that. So we can have that kind of dialogue, or or even etiquettes. There was this guy who said, like, oh, we hired this diaspora girl, but she was so loud and she was interacting too much with men, but I can't talk to her. And then we said, if you want, we can run a small workshop, because girls in the West and girls in the local level that you accustomed to see have different attitude in the workplace. People in the West believe that they are equal, whereas in Somalia it could be like, don't talk loud, or like, I don't know, like, don't talk to the men or something like that. So we can help you to run those kind of workshops. So it's like, for us, we want to create that dialogue and support the private sectors as much as we want, to support females.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your goals as a WEP signatory. I hope that we'll be able to support you in whatever way possible. And we kind of look forward to seeing more of what you're going to do as a WEP signatory, but you've already accomplished so much. So congratulations on that. Great. So let's move on to Alice, our next panelist. Alice is the CEO, I mentioned, of CTG, which is Committed to Good. She basically grew this company from the beginnings in Afghanistan in 2006 to the company it is today, which deploys over 10,000 staff operating across 21 conflict-affected countries, basically enabling humanitarian projects. So I'm sure Alice can tell you a little bit more about it, but from what I know already, that they support projects like Ebola treatment clinics in Liberia, food aid distribution in South Sudan, monitoring migrants' movements across Libya, and also contributing to the new constitution of Somalia. So Alice is not just a really, really strong supporter of the WEPs, but she also won the prestigious Business for Peace Award and is a UN Global Compact SDG pioneer for empowering women in conflict settings. So basically a perfect speaker to have with us today. She leads by example in ensuring that women play a broader role in humanitarian projects in high-risk environments, which is extremely needed in a lot of these scenarios. And she galvanizes the private sector for collective action around SDGs and really is a big advocate for women's empowerment. So Alice, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Just to start off, if you could maybe just share a little bit about your company and why you signed on to the WEPs.
Thank you very much, Lee. And I firstly want to say thank you very much to yourself, to UN Women, to IORA and the Australian government for actually inviting me to participate in today's conversation. It's something very close to my heart. I think you've done a very good sales pitch on what CTG does, so I'm not sure I need to go further into detail. But really, why I'm so excited to be a part of this today is to talk about the journey that we've had. It's been about 5 years since we signed the Women's Empowerment Principles. It seems like an awful lot longer. We've achieved more than I could ever have hoped to have achieved, but there's still a long path and journey that we need to go on. And so, yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you very much. I think when it comes to CTG, our purpose wholeheartedly resides in the conflict and the fragile countries that we work in and the communities that we are there with. And we have about 4,000 staff on the ground today. And as sort of not only an employer, but the nature of work means that we have the ability to improve women's access to decent work opportunities in these countries and the communities that we connect with. And listening to Sadia earlier about some of the challenges that are faced in these countries, it's very different to the challenges that I would have seen growing up. And as Sadia mentioned, so one of the biggest challenges we see is trying to get women to apply for job opportunities. Actually reaching out to women in the countries that we work is so much harder, and they are not necessarily afforded access. They face barriers from family members and obviously unconscious bias, but also what we see a huge amount of is the conscious bias that is actually faced. And I've heard many similar stories to what Sadia mentioned earlier about companies making conscious bias mistakes in creating separate work areas for women, but the women don't want the separate work areas, and giving them other sort of preferential treatment. We actually had one scenario recently in Afghanistan with one of our clients who asked us to hire someone, and they said, oh, well, it has to be a man for this role. And we challenged them and we said, well, why does a man have to do this role? A woman could perfectly easily do this role. And they said, oh no, well, we require the person to work overtime. And we said, well, a woman could work overtime. Oh no, but unfortunately we provide all the women a bus home at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So they created preferential treatment for women that had meant that a woman wasn't, therefore in their eyes, eligible for this job opportunity, which it was a local position, and an Afghan woman could easily be qualified. And we had Afghan women in our database who were qualified for the role, but they still would not accept it, and they still went ahead and hired a man for that role. So some of these are the challenges that are faced, that I think in fragile and conflict affected countries, we're quite a long way away from being able to achieve these. And that is why it's really become sort of CTG's focus to try and get more companies to sign up to the WEPs in fragile and conflict affected countries, because there is a lot to be done, and we know our sphere of influence is very much in these countries. And I think we can do a lot to help other private sector organizations signing up and taking a stand to make a difference.
Alice, does CTG have any specific goals for implementing the WEPs, or how have you gone about implementing the WEPs?
We have quite a lot of goals. I mean, I think what I love about the WEPs is it creates this framework. One of the things, actually, it came out a few years or a year or so after we signed the WEPs, was the WEPs self-assessment toolkit. And that has actually been really helpful, because whilst you've got the principles, it allows you to do pretty much what you want with it. Whereas the toolkit goes into a lot more detail around specific things that are actually needed to be done to make a substantial change. And that has really helped us focus our journey and everything. We've created a strategy around the WEPs. We have our policies that run all through these main principles of the WEPs. I say the main principles because the first principle is really the corporate leadership bit, so we've ticked that box by signing the WEPs. But principles 2 to 6, and then under that we have created, under our strategy, which is a 5-year strategy, we've created programs and projects, and we have monitoring and measurability, and we measure our progress as we go along. In terms of our specific goals, when some of the achievements that we've had, oh, we seem to have lost Lee. I will continue anyway, as long as, do we still have participants? We still have participants, I think. So hopefully people are hearing the conversation. Oh, excellent. Thank you, Mark. I'm pleased you can still hear us. Since joining the WEPs, I had the honor of being on the UN Global Compact board in the UAE. And under that, I offered to jointly form the Women's Empowerment Principles Task Force in the UAE. And when we started, I think we had about 3 signatories in the UAE. I think now there are over 100 signatories. I'm no longer part of that task force. I handed it over when I left the board last year, but they are still making huge progress. And I like to think that I was part of the start of that snowball effect. But in terms of our goals moving forward, our primary gender equality program really at CTG is our Female First program. And it kind of goes across all of our principles. It started very much under principle 2. It was a recruitment initiative which pledged to create job opportunities for women in conflict affected countries, and has a goal of 30% of all of our project related roles being represented by women by 2030. In Somalia, we have reached already 25% women in project related roles. We started with 6% in 2016. So it's progressed. In Afghanistan, we have 21% of our project related roles being represented by women, and we have over 1,000 staff working there. So it's a good ratio, and we're very pleased that we are getting close to achieving some of our goals there. Under that, we have created other projects. We have our career development workshop under our train and partner program, which we have rolled out in Gaza, and we have rolled out in Somalia, where we are providing job training for female graduates from university on very simple things of how to find a job. How do you write a cover letter, presenting your CV in the right way, how to conduct yourself in a job interview, and helping them with finding how to source job opportunities. We have unfortunately had to stall those during COVID because they are first face-to-face, they are very interactive. And we had hoped to actually achieve 10 in Somalia this year, working in partnership with Somali organizations like Hanoi Academy and City University, where we were, we then, once the ladies had gone through our training, they went and did a 3-month English proficiency scholarship. And after that, we were hoping for them to go through our Women in Aid program, where we were, which is an internship and mentoring program, where we help source opportunities for the graduates of our career development workshop to get job experience, with a focus on public sector opportunities, but actually looking at the private sector as well. So our Female First program is broadening as our journey progresses.
Great. Alice, I have to apologize. I lost my internet connection for a little bit, so I don't want to repeat any questions that you may have actually already answered, but I just wanted to follow up with a question about what are the challenges that you've faced in implementing the WEPs, specifically in the environments that you work in. And maybe perhaps if you have any recommendations for other companies that are working in conflict-affected countries that might want to sign on to the WEPs and are feeling like the challenges are insurmountable, if you have any recommendations on how you've overcome these challenges.
I think our career development program actually is a good example of how we've overcome our challenges. So we launched Female First, which is sourcing, submitting and selecting female candidates for job opportunities. And what we found was initially it was very hard to get women to apply. There were no applications coming in from women. And so that encouraged us to run a large outreach in all the countries that we work in. We use social media. It's very powerful in a lot of fragile and conflict affected countries. I think is it Facebook in Libya is the biggest job board. So yeah, it's social media has been very helpful. We do radio campaigns. We do various other outreach through local partnerships with local job boards to encourage women to apply. In Afghanistan, initially, we even ran a kind of community engagement program, going into the communities, actually talking to families around women coming to work. We work with universities in Afghanistan, trying to put the word out for women to actually apply for jobs. That was one of the challenges we had, and this is why we actually came up with the idea to run the career development workshops, because women were nervous. And as Sadia mentioned, you know, she's very lucky to have family and connections in Somalia that allow her to progress. And it's really amazing to see how shy a lot of, I don't really know any other way to describe it really, how shy and lacking confidence a lot of the young female graduates who are extremely bright are. And we actually, one of the ladies who went through our career development program in Somalia came on board with CTG as an intern, and she was extremely shy to begin with. She, I think, has progressed up 2 job roles since she joined. She's now so confident. She's working as an account manager directly with our clients, doing an absolutely fantastic job. Yet day one was extremely shy. I think another recommendation that I would like to make, I mean, our focus now is a lot on partnerships, and it's going to be a key focus for us over the next few years. We partner on a lot of our initiatives. As I said, we work with City University in Somalia on our career development workshops. We did similar in Gaza, where we were working with an English language school there. And I think partnerships is really important, particularly when you're talking about trying to advance the women's empowerment principles and getting companies to sign up. As they say, many hands make light work, and the task is enormous. And what is amazing is that UN Women have created this fantastic platform for the private sector in the women's empowerment principles. I think it's now the private sector's responsibility to take the lead on getting more private sector organizations to sign up to it.
Thanks. So I'm actually mindful of time, but I mean, your experiences, Alice, I'm sure you could continue to speak for another hour because you just have such good experience and such kind of innovative approaches to overcome challenges, but that is at the nature of your work. So I'm not surprised that you are you know, in the lead of implementing the WEPs and have so many good practices to share. We did have we have two questions actually from the Q&A, but I think they've actually been answered already. So I'm mindful of time. We have about, you know, 6 or 7, 8 minutes. If anyone wants to chime in with a question for the participants, you can raise your hand and I will unmute you, or you can go ahead, please, and also just add another question to the Q&A, which is at the bottom of your screen. I should see a little hand pop up, I think is the way that it works on Zoom. I'm not seeing any, but while we give people maybe another minute to come up with a question, Alice, can you maybe tell us whether and how COVID-19 has actually impacted your work or perhaps has impacted your goals as a WEP signatory?
I think we've been sort of relatively lucky when it comes to COVID. Our business operations seem to be continuing very much as normal. We had to obviously put additional programs in place to support people staying in country. I had a lot of international staff who remained in Somalia during a lockdown. I had international staff in South Sudan who remained in country, locked down, locked into the countries, not able to go home for 4 or 5 months. So duty of care is something that's really important to us. Obviously, we're working in very insecure environments. And but business has been kind of as normal. Interestingly, I was trying to look yesterday for some data on the impact of COVID on women in fragile and conflict affected countries, but there is quite a lack of data on the subject. We released a white paper in March, I think it was, which looked at women's access to employment opportunities in fragile and conflict affected countries. And we did put some information around the impact of COVID on women in these countries. But yeah, I think it's something that we need to start looking at is some of the statistics, because if we have some of the statistics and information, we can all channel our efforts a little bit more to try and overcome some of the challenges that women have actually faced during the pandemic.
Mm. Yes,
one of the things we did launch was our CTG Wellbeing Program, which is very much focused on safeguarding and wellbeing counselling, which we provided to all of our staff throughout all countries, all local and international staff, and we're able to support it in a number of different languages as well. So that was something that I think was a necessary addition to our duty of care.
Excellent. We do have one question here. Please go ahead. Derehe Zudu, if you can just unmute your microphone.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Can
Hi.
you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I appreciate all the efforts you make to empower women in improve their decision makers and their livelihood. But I want to learn from you that how is the effort of you and woman in institutionalizing such effort in most developing countries. I want to hear more on that and learn from you. Thank you. This is Derege from Ethiopia, UN Woman. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand. You were interested in learning more about UN Women's initiatives in what area?
And institutionalizing the woman empowerment in leadership and decision making.
Okay, through the women's empowerment principles, or because UN Women has large different programs that focus on increasing women's political participation, ensuring that women are in decision-making roles in all forms of national government or local government, working on changing policies to introduce quotas, to ensure that women are more equally represented in politics. Also through the women's empowerment principles and our women's economic empowerment programs, we are working to ensure that women have higher positions, decision-making roles in the private sector through supporting women's representation on boards. Basically, we are working with the private sector as well as governments to increase women's representation in all spheres. So did you have a bit more of a specific question?
Yeah, my specific question is how we can focus on not just a project or a program level, which ends up after 3 or 5 years, but it must be continued with government structures so that government should have endorsed it as its task. Okay. So that with the absence of international NGO, any other institutions, it must be continued.
I understand.
Or women themselves have institutionalized themselves to build such of principles. That's the point which I want to learn from you, especially my colleague from Somalia. She has discussed a lot, and my colleagues whom she described, I have a friend from Sudan and the other, that is Alicia. I want to share. I want her sharing her document to make such stuff into a national level. Thank you very much. If I make myself clear.
Yes, no, I understand. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, all of UN Women's work is looking to ensure that our efforts are sustainable. So as you said, nothing should ever just be a one-off. That's why we try and work at national level to influence policies, policies that actually influence practices. So it's not just a training, for example, that people who are in government now receive, and then it's not institutionalized. So all of our efforts are basically, we try and ensure that a policy changes, legal reform to ensure that gender equality is, for example, integrated into the Constitution or any kind of law or policy. So all of our work, we have that at the basis of it. We want it to be sustainable. We want it to be long lasting. I don't know if either one of my fellow panelists wanted to speak at all on that point, or perhaps the question was just specifically for UN Women. I am mindful actually of that we're running out of time. I don't know if anyone else had any other questions for the panelists.
kindly share me the document on the principles, please.
Yes, happy to.
Thank you.
Okay, it doesn't appear that we have many more questions. And I am mindful of time. So I just wanted to share my email address here and thank our panelists, most importantly, for taking the time and sharing their experiences and expertise and recommendations for other companies that may be on the line that are interested in the WEPs or possibly becoming a WEPs signatory, but maybe were feeling overwhelmed by some of the challenges that they might face if they wanted to do so in a conflict affected or fragile environment. So please feel free to contact me on my email address there, as well as I've placed the weps.org website. And on the website, you'll find a lot more information about the principles. You'll find some of the tools. Alice mentioned the self-assessment tool. It's kind of a gap assessment tool. We also have an equal pay tool, which is also a self-assessment tool for companies to assess the gaps that exist in their policies and practices. We have guidance on how to become a WEP signatory. We have thematic guides that have recently been produced that focus on issues such as sexual harassment, building inclusive boards, mentoring in the workplace, which is a topic that came up quite often today. The extreme need for female role models and mentors for younger women to follow in their footsteps and to not, basically break down some of these stereotypes and biases, both conscious and unconscious. You'll also find information about gender responsive procurement, among many other topics. So if you have just one more minute before we finish, I just wanted to launch a quick poll. If you wouldn't mind, it would be much appreciated. This actually will help us to inform the next webinars that we'll have in this series on the WEPs. And hopefully you will join us on our next webinar in the series. But thank you all for spending the hour with us today. And here's a poll, if you wouldn't mind answering just a few quick questions.
Lee, I just wanted to say, whilst you're waiting for the poll to come in, that if anyone wants to talk to me further about our experiences of implementing the WEPs in fragile and conflict affected countries, I've shared my email on the comments. So please do reach out to me directly. CTG does continue to do a lot of capacity building around the WEPs in these countries that we work in. And we will be looking to kind of continue our conversation with private sector organizations into the new year. And we're hoping to run a series of webinars to talk a little bit more detail about the implementation of each principle by principle as an official parallel event to CSW.
Oh, wow.
So, and hopefully UN Women will be involving themselves in our country level discussions. So
that's great.
Yeah, if people want to continue the conversation, I'm very much available.
Okay, thanks so much, Alice.
Yeah, same here. If anybody wants to know a little bit about the work that we are doing in Somalia, please feel free to contact us. We also provide trainings in terms of like how to actually become your own boss for design for females. We are actually managing the first public business incubator in Mogadishu now. So we are aiming to have more women, leaders in economical development in Somalia. So yeah, so feel free to actually communicate with me. I'm on social media. And also I can put my email address here as well.
Thank you. Well, I'm mindful of everyone's time. So as the poll questions come in, I just want to thank you again. And I really look forward to continuing to follow the WEPs path both of you have been following and really both are mentors, I think, in your actions. And I appreciate your sharing your emails for people to follow up with you. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Lee. Thank you very much, IORA and Australian government, and for everyone who attended. Do you wish for us to wait on the call for the poll, or are you going to be sharing this afterwards?
Yeah, I'll share it afterwards.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah, have a lovely day.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.